We're going to go over as much stuff as we can in Studiometry's Preferences window. To get to Studiometry's Preferences window, you can just go to the Studiometry menu and select Preferences. And this will bring up Studiometry's Preferences window. Now, as you can see, there are a ton of settings in here. There's 18 sections on the left that you can select from, and each section has several settings within it. So we're going to try to go over everything we can. But two things. First, we're not going to go over every single setting. If we don't go over something and you have a question about it, you can contact us at any time at support.oranged.net and open up a support ticket to ask. And the second thing is things may change from when we record this video to when you start using Studiometry. We're always updating this window and other sections of Studiometry, adding in new features, organizing things. But this is kind of a living entity that we're always updating. So if something doesn't match in the video, your copy of Studiometry, you can just get a hold of us and ask any questions you might have about the discrepancies between the two. So with that said, we're going to go over each section one at a time in this video. So if you want to get information about a later section, just skip ahead in the video and you'll be able to see based on what's selected here what part of the video we're at. So I'm just going to close Studiometry's main window so there's a little less clutter in the background. So first up is the My Info section. Here you can just type in information about your company, about your name and contact details, and this is used when you generate invoices and reports. So the default fields on most invoices and reports will pull this information when you're creating them. You can import this from your address book on Mac. If you're using Studiometry networking, you can download that information from your server. And if you're using Studiometry Cloud, there will be buttons here to update or download the information from Studiometry Cloud. So it's a simple section, but it's used mostly for when you're generating your invoices and reports. Next up is the General section. And this just has some general settings for Studiometry, including the data folder and where it's saved, which is where all of your Studiometry data is on your hard drive. Security settings such as enabling passwords, which is more of a single user setting, because if you're using networking or cloud, that will all be set up in the employees section. But if you're just on a single user, you can lock the local machine with a password here. You can enable or disable backups here, so you can set up Studiometry to automatically back up your data and then limit the number of backups and do various other things with that. And then the last section here is to check for orphaned projects, which means Studiometry will periodically check to see if a project doesn't have a client, where in Studiometry your projects must be associated with clients, so if this happens then something must have gone wrong. So you can have Studiometry make sure that nothing's going wrong in your data by enabling or disabling this. And if an orphan project does come up, Studiometry will just tell you this project does not have an associated client and ask what you'd like to do with it. So the next section is the display section. The most important setting in this section is probably at the top, where you can decide how your clients and projects will have their colors set in the main window. For clients, you can color them by category or just manually, and for projects you can color them by category, status, or you can have them colored the same as whatever client that they're attached to. Now to show you what this really means, I'm going to open up Studiometry's main window. And we can see that the clients and the projects here, they all have different colors associated with them. So since the clients, for example, are colored by category, each client will have its color based on the client category. And just to skip ahead really quickly, the categories are in the categories and rates section. So you can see the client categories have colors associated with them. Project statuses have colors associated with them. But every client, for example, that's a friend client, will have this red color associated with it in the main window. So, and that's because of the setting at the top of the display section here. And then next you can set the background color of your work items based on if they're estimated purchase order or non-billable, and this is how it will appear in your work list. And you also have other display settings, such as the ability to show or hide certain columns in your work list. These are all sort of self-explanatory. The last up is the dock display, and this is a Mac-only option, where you can have a Studiometry in your dock. You see this number 1 here. This will appear based on what you have selected for the dock display. So you can either have the number of running timers, which will show you there's however many are running, however many are paused, or you can have the number of notifications that you currently have in Studiometry. So the next section is the program memory section. And here you can edit things like your autocomplete list and your abbreviations. The top section is all related to the autocomplete list, which is it's just a list of descriptions that you've used when you're entering a work item or a to-do. You can have Studiometry save those descriptions so that the next time you're entering a new work or to-do item, it'll autocomplete as you're typing it in. So you can edit the list here, you can enable or disable the autocomplete functions, and you can enable or disable the capturing of new items as well. So if you want to have a fixed list that's your autocomplete list, you can just disable this, and then Studiometry won't save any new descriptions that you enter. You'll just be able to manage it here. The bottom section is related to abbreviations in Studiometry, and you can use these in conjunction with your autocomplete list. But what abbreviations are is they let you just type out a couple of characters, and then it will expand that to be a much longer string. So you can create new abbreviations here where you just enter the abbreviation, and then whatever you enter up here, when you type that into the text field, it will expand to have whatever you enter into the content. So these can be used in your work debt, credit, and work description fields, and also in the extra info field. So you can enable or disable that for either of these. The next section is categories and rates. Now there's a completely separate tutorial video for categories and rates that you can look at on our support site that will go into a lot more detail about all of this, but just to briefly go over it, it's just these are your client and project categories and statuses, and then your work types here as well. This window, all of the top 4 sections are used whenever you create a new client or project. You must assign a category and a status, and your work items must have rates assigned. The only other setting here is at the bottom. You can have your categories and rates automatically updated based on a project status. So if I check this, we can look at the auto update settings really quick. We can have a project status updated whenever work items are added, whenever invoices are created, or whenever all invoices are paid. And we can select from this project status list back here, we can select a specific category, or sorry, status for each of these events. And then what this does is, if I hit OK, Studiometry will always check any projects to see which of these is true, and then set the status based on that. And again, you can enable or disable this function just with this checkbox here. So if you want more information about all of this and what you can do in here, check out that other video on categories and rates. Next up is billing settings. We'll just go from top to bottom here. For project estimates in Studiometry, you have a lot of different ways that you can create them, and this pop-up here will be the basically the default for when you're creating a new project. You can change each project to any of these different estimating modes, but there's 4 in Studiometry, and any new project will have whatever you have selected here as its estimating mode. If you click on the little help icon, it'll tell you more information about what all of these things mean, and you can get a little more detail about estimates in Studiometry. Next up are payment terms, which this is just a field where you can customize it here, and you can pull that into an invoice or report if you'd like on any of your templates. Same with your tax ID number. And then we have our invoice due in dates field here. This is when we create a new invoice, Studiometry will have the due date be however many days away that we have set here. So this is 2 weeks. When we create a new invoice today, it will automatically be set as 2 weeks from today is the due date. This is the global setting again, and for each project and client, you can set the default days for that item to override the global setting, and that's within the client and project settings. Next up is receipts. Studiometry can create receipts for any payments that you receive. When you create a new payment in Studiometry, you can have a receipt generated using a custom receipt template. And if you click this button, it'll bring up the template editing window. And this is just Studiometry's template editor where you can customize really any of these fields and move it around and put in your branding and do whatever you want with it. But that's used just for receipts. You can actually also enable or disable where Studiometry will automatically email your clients receipts when you enter them into Studiometry. So that setting is here. Next up are alerts. Studiometry can tell you if your invoices or to-dos are overdue, and you can decide when it will tell you based on the item's due date. You'll receive a notification in Studiometry. If you're on a Mac, you'll receive a notification up in your notifications area. But that's what alerts do. The next settings at the bottom are related to your timers and work items. The inactivity monitor, this will let you, if you're using running timers, Studiometry can track if your computer is actually being used, and it will see if your mouse is moving or your keyboard is being typed on. And if it is, then, or sorry, if it isn't, then Studiometry will consider your timer inactive, and it will ask you, hey, you've been gone for 20 minutes. Do you want to bill for this time, or do you want to consider it paused? So that's what the inactivity monitor does. It lets you, basically, Studiometry will make sure that you're at your computer working while your timers are running. The option below that, to limit each employee to one active running timer, all this does is if you have multiple timers running, Studiometry will basically have it where when you start a new timer, it will pause all of your other timers. So that way you can't accidentally have two timers for two different projects running at the same time if you're not working on them. And then next we have timer rounding. Studiometry lets you customize the rounding for your timers, so it will decide, if you want to round to hour, half hour, quarter hour, all these settings here. But basically, when you run your timers, and you'll be able to see an updated exact time of how long you've been running it. But if you decide to pause or stop the timer, it will update it with the rounded amount here based on this setting. You also have the option to always round up, and then the option to ignore rounding when you're calculating your cost of profit. So it would just choose or calculate that based on the actual time that you ran the timer. This is the global setting for this, for rounding, and your projects, you can customize the rounding setting for each project in the project's billing settings section. Then lastly, at the bottom here, we have our advanced billing section. So this window has about 30 more settings that we can customize, and we're not going to go over every single one of them, but you can. And most of these are self-explanatory. There's a lot that you can change in here, but if you have any questions about this, please feel free to contact us at support.orange.net. Most of these are related to when you're creating new items or modifying items, how you want Studiometry to work. So it's just a way to customize a lot of the default behaviors to work more towards how you want to do things. It's really just, you can change these settings to save yourself time. So if, for example, you always create your projects as non-public, you can enable that here by default. Same thing with if you always enter your work time as it calculated totals, you can enable that here. So a lot of these settings are just kind of little ways to save you time when you're using Studiometry. So we'll close out of that, and then we'll go to the next section, which is ID numbering. This section is used to determine the ID formats when you create a client or a project or an invoice or a report or purchase order. And also on the bottom here, you have your project combined name and ID format. And all this is throughout the program, you can display your projects with a combined name and ID format, and you can set the format here. So instead of just having the project name or ID, you can display both of them in whatever order that you want with whatever formatting that you'd like. Now, this whole setup up here, you can see there's a little bit of code in here for each of these. We have a separate tutorial video that will go over how to set these up. It's sort of complicated, but it's really just more that it gives you a lot of control how you can set up the automated ID numbering in Studiometry. So if you want to view information about that, you can just click on the little question mark icon on the bottom of the window. And then one of the settings at the bottom here is for identical IDs. You can have Studiometry ask you or assist you or try to fix if you have two items with identical IDs somehow in Studiometry. So that's just a way to assist you in managing your ID numbers. So the next section is to-dos and Gantt. The top part of this, the to-do due-in days and default due time, this and also the assigned employees section. These three are basically the defaults for when you're creating a new to-do or event in Studiometry. You can change the due-in days that will automatically be filled out. You can change the due time to a specific time, or you can have either of these left blank so that there's no due date automatically entered, but these are really just for the defaults for new new to-do items in Studiometry. Same with the assigned employees. The options here are when we create a new to-do, we can have all employees assigned, we can have just the current employee assigned, or we can have no employees assigned to it. And these are all, again, just the defaults for new to-do items. The bottom section here, we have some options for the Gantt chart in Studiometry, which appears within your project planning section. But you can have dependencies shown, and you can have them updated when you're changing the parents' dates. So those are the two settings there. And then finally, we have the ability to update which days are considered working weekdays. This is also for the Gantt chart. So basically, if we enable or disable certain days, the Gantt chart will update the items based on considering them work days or not. So if you have, for example, a Gantt item that says that it's 5 days long, but it starts on Thursday, it won't consider Saturday or Sunday days, so it will be 5 days not including that. Next section is project templates. Project templates are used when you create a new project in Studiometry to automatically assign several pieces of information to that project. If I just select the one template we have here, you can see on the right you can assign to-dos, specs, categories, notes. You can assign blueprints to project templates, specific employees, and stages as well. So all of this is part of one project template where when we create a new project, if we select that template, it will assign everything that we have here. Now, obviously there's a lot of settings here, so we made a new video for that as well. So you can click on the watch tutorial button to see more about project templates and what you can do with them and how you can use them. So the next setting, or next section, is taxes. And this is where you can set up Studiometry's taxes. There's a separate tutorial video about this as well that goes into detail about how to use taxes in Studiometry, so you can just go to that tutorial video if you'd like. But I'll just go over really quickly the settings on the bottom here. You can enter and create your taxes at the top, but in the bottom we have the option to keep all of your debt credits updated with the default tax types. And what that means is each of your work items will have a category assigned to it, and for your categories you can assign default tax types. So if we have this checked, Studiometry will always update those categories to make sure that they have the correct tax types that match with the taxes here. This on the bottom, it's basically how the taxes will be calculated, but you can read the description for information about tax calculating details. So the next section is currencies. Here we can set up Studiometry's currencies. The main setting for this is to automatically update exchange rates online. You can have Studiometry download that information. Basically what you do is you set up one default currency and then all of your other currencies that you would use, and you'll be able to see the exchange rate from that currency to your default currency. You can add new currencies using the plus button and just select them and choose which currency that you want to add down here. If I select any of the currencies from this list, Studiometry will automatically download the exchange rate for me. And it will update that based on the exchange rate with our default currency. We can customize the symbol for the currency here. We can also change the exchange rate to something custom if we'd like. This is all really just, you can set up a list of whichever currencies you'd like to use. So when you start Studiometry, it will only have one currency. But if you bill in or track your work in multiple currencies, you'll add them here, and then throughout the program you'll be able to select those currencies when you're creating work items or invoices or payments or pretty much anything else that has a value. And then the setting at the bottom to save exchange rates on a per item basis, we always recommend leaving this enabled. Basically what this does is when you create a new work item, it will save the exchange rate for that work item for when it was created. So if the exchange rate changes in the future, that item's value won't change no matter which currency you display the item in. If we disable this, then Studiometry will always just use the global currency exchange rate, and that could cause items to change in the future. So leave it enabled unless you're sure that you don't want it enabled. The next section is emails. So the top part of this section is all related to sending emails from Studiometry. You can set up how it will send emails. And you can also have it enter default CC and BCC addresses, as well as some default text, subject and body as well. And then the bottom part is related to mail integration. This section down here is a Mac-only section. And up here, the options for sending emails, these are all done using AppleScript integrations, so these are also Mac-only. But you can select certain email applications to have Studiometry send your emails through those, or you can set it up to connect with your SMTP server to send emails directly through your server. So that's what these settings are. The next one is you can have default CC and BCC addresses where Studiometry will automatically fill this in when sending out emails. and you can have default subject and body for invoices, payments, and reports. These are all used when you hit an email button within Studiometry to generate an email to your client. That will happen if you're in an invoice or report and you hit an email button, or if you're in a payment and you try to send a receipt. But that's a lot of what this is used for. You can also have those emails captured as logs in Studiometry. So if you're on a project and you send an email invoice, Studiometry will capture that and add it to the project as a log. So you'll know when you sent it. You'll have a link to the email, and that will automatically be added to Studiometry here. The last section is the ability to automatically import emails. And you can do this currently only with Apple Mail. But if you enable mail integration, it'll tell you, there's an article that you can go to read about how to do this and what you can do with it. And I would definitely recommend going to that article if you're interested in having your emails added to Studiometry automatically as logs. So that's what all these settings are for here. And these are all self-explanatory where, if you want to link the email, you can do it using the ID or the contact address. But all of this is detailed if you go to that knowledge base article about importing email from Apple Mail into Studiometry. So the next section is templates. So when we go here, we can see our invoice templates. The visual invoice templates are at the top. And then we have our visual report templates, and then we have a list of all the code-based templates on the bottom. So we can double-click on any of these visual templates to open up the template editing window, where we can customize all the fields and branding and everything like that for the templates. But we have another separate tutorial for this window to explain what all of this stuff is. So if you want information about that, just go to the invoice template tutorial. But this setting really just lets you get to your templates, and you can duplicate them or delete them or customize them. And then the other main setting here is at the top, you can set the default invoice and default report template. So when I click this, it'll just bring up a list of all the items. Obviously the 2 visual ones are at the top, and then the 4 code-based invoice templates come from here. But whatever we have selected here, whenever I go to create a new invoice, it will just automatically select the template that I have as my default invoice template. So same for reports. You can set a default report template, so when you create a new report, it will select that template automatically for you. So again, if you want more information about how to actually edit these templates, go to that tutorial video for some more details and a how-to on that. The next section is system syncing. This section lets you set up syncing with other aspects of your computer, such as Accounted, Apple's address book or contacts, and then Apple's calendar and reminder, or what used to be called iCal, and then also your notifications, such as the Notification Center or Growl notifications on OS X. So the first setting is for syncing with Accounted, which is our accounting program that works in conjunction with Studiometry. Studiometry does all the time billing and invoicing and CRM functions, and Accounted then after that can help track your bank account balances and create tax reports and do various other things on the accounting side of your business. And you can have Studiometry sync with either older versions of Accounted or the current version based on this setting here. The next section is contacts. You can have your contacts imported into Studiometry from Address Book, and you can set up on a per contact basis if Studiometry will sync to and from, and how to organize them, and that's kind of what all of this is. You have just various settings for syncing with Address Book. One thing to note here is that since all of the contacts have their own setting for whether or not it will sync into the address book, if you want to modify as a whole to turn syncing off or on for all your contacts, you would come here and then just hit the Apply to All Contacts button. If you just change this without hitting that button, then this is what will apply for newly created contacts. But if you want to actually set all of them to whatever this setting is, you would hit the Apply to All Contacts button afterwards. Next is calendars and reminders here. You can have Studiometry sync your to-dos, your invoice due dates, and your project deadlines all to Apple's calendar. And you can do that by just checking and enabling any of these. One thing that you'll want to set up is which calendar it syncs to in your probably your iCloud account. And to do that, you would just click Select Specific Syncing Calendars, and then you can check one for your to-dos, and you can check one for your events. The other options here are the ability to import new items from the calendar, So if you select a specific calendar for Studiometry to sync with, and then you add an item to that calendar outside of Studiometry, you can have Studiometry import that as a to-do. And then the other option is if something's deleted outside of Studiometry, you can also have that deleted within Studiometry as well. So these are basically a second level of integration. If you don't enable these, then really all the syncing will do is make a copy of your Studiometry data in iCal or Calendar. And if you do enable these, then any changes that you make on one or the other will be synced both ways. And then the bottom section is notifications. You can enable or disable notifications for certain things that come up in Studiometry. Studiometry has its own notifications window, but you can also receive notifications that will appear up by your menu bar, like how you receive notifications for pretty much anything else on OS X. The next section is the status item. This is another Mac-only section. That's because what the status item is it's this little menu button up here by your clock. You can click on it to view information about your running timers or your projects, and you can create and modify things from here. So you can the good use of the status item is that you can access it while you're in any program without having to come back to Studiometry first. So you can enable or disable it here. You can decide how it will display items. So if I select projects, it'll just have a flat list of all my projects. And if I have clients then projects, it'll show all my clients. And then when I mouse over a client, it'll show me the projects for that client. So that's the setting for that. And then you can also change the action for whenever you select a client, project, or timer. So this is what will happen when you select that item type. Next section is employees. Here you can set up a list of employees and you can customize information about them and their permissions and various other things. You can add employees to this list by clicking on the plus button below the list, and it brings up the employee editing window. Here we can enter a name, a login name, and this is what's used if you're logging into a Studiometry network or Studiometry Cloud, their password, and then a few other settings. Now one of the main settings here is the default timer. You can set a default timer for each employee, and what that means is if the client or project doesn't have a timer assigned, it will use this employee's default timer. Now if you have an employee who always does the same type of work and you want that to override the client or project settings, you would check this box here so that no matter what, when this employee creates a new work item, it will go in as whatever type you've selected here. The cost rate is if this employee has a cost per hour and you want to track that, you can enter that here, and when you create a new work item, say it's hourly, Studiometry will automatically enter that cost rate for calculating the profit of the work item. And then you can edit the contact info to create a contact in Studiometry that's linked to this employee. The next section for the employee editing is permissions, and this is where you can enable or disable all parts of the program on a per employee basis. So obviously there's a ton of settings here. If you click on a setting, it'll show you information on the right to describe what that setting does. But you can see there's maybe 40 or 50 different sections of the program that you can enable or disable on a per employee basis. So this is a good way if you have a large team and you want certain people accessing certain things. This is where you would do it, is within the preferences window, employees section, and then the permissions tab for an employee. The settings at the bottom, you can have Studiometry pause your timers on logout. So if you're logged in as an employee and that employee has a running timer, if you quit Studiometry or log out of that employee, it will automatically pause those timers. The other options, use multiple employees. This is if you don't have Studiometry Cloud running, then this will enable or disable multiple employee functions throughout the program. If you do have Studiometry Cloud enabled, many of these won't appear, these settings, because they're automatically enabled for Studiometry Cloud and Studiometry networking purposes. Which brings us to the next section, networking. Now if you have multiple computers and you want to sync data between them, the easiest way to do this is using Studiometry Cloud because you don't have to set up a server and you just log in and it syncs all the data on Studiometry to all the different machines. But if for some reason you want to set up your own network, Studiometry has the ability to do that as well. How you do that is you set up one computer as your server by clicking this computer as server, and then you set up the other machines to say always connect to the server, and then you enter the IP address and then you tell it to connect, and Studiometry will always sync with that server machine. Again, this is kind of a more advanced way of syncing. It's the old way that Studiometry always used to do syncing, but since we've introduced Studiometry Cloud, that's a much easier way and more consistent and faster way to get all of the syncing done. But for the traditional syncing settings, these are all explained here. This is, if you select this computer server, then you'll have the server settings enabled. And if you select always connect to server, then this will be a client machine, and you'll have the client settings that you can customize here. If you have any questions about this, you can click the question mark icon to go to a knowledge base article, and you can also ask us questions about any of these settings at support.orange.net. And then finally, the last section is Studiometry Touch. Studiometry Touch is an app for your iPhone or iPad or iPod Touch. It's an iOS app that lets you have a lot of the features of Studiometry on your mobile device. If you're not using Studiometry Cloud, then you would set up your Studiometry Touch syncing here. Basically, you would tell Studiometry Touch to connect to your computer's IP address, and you would have it sync with your computer. Obviously, again, it's much easier if you're just going to be syncing Studiometry Touch to sign up for Studiometry Cloud, and then you would just log into your cloud account, and then any changes you make in Studiometry will automatically appear on your phone or iPad, and vice versa. But if you aren't going to be using Studiometry Cloud, you can enable Studiometry Touch syncing here, and then whenever you try to connect a touch device to your computer, it will appear in this list, and you can customize some of the settings for it there as well. Studiometry Touch, again, this section won't appear if you're using Studiometry Cloud because all of your devices will automatically have touch enabled, and you don't have to manage any serial numbers or device settings or anything like that. So that's it. That's the preferences window. Obviously, there are a ton of settings in here, and this is over a 30-minute video already, and we breezed through a lot of them. So if you have any questions about any of these, please feel free to get in touch with us at support.orange.net.